Alright YouTube, it's time for one last video on the Brexit, one last video on whether the UK will leave the European Union or stay in. Possibly, depending on the result, the most important video that I'll ever make, and if I can only change one or two people's minds, it could, because of the polling being so close, that could actually tip the balance in favor of one or the other. I encourage all of my British subscribers to vote Leave. Anyone who is eligible to vote, I hope you're registered to do so. I encourage you to vote Leave. From this side of the pond, the European Union looks doomed, let's face it. You can make up all the moral arguments that you want about we're better together, multiculturalism, our economy's better. The European Union's not going to stay like that. We can already see the writing on the wall as for what's going to happen with the European Union. You've got Turkey itching to join. It will join shortly after this vote, regardless of what the outcome is. If the UK votes out and leaves the EU, Turkey will probably be admitted anyway. If it votes in, I can assure you, Turkey will very quickly become an EU nation. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Turks, along with tens or hundreds of thousands of refugees, will enter the UK. There will be nothing you can do to stop them. They will gain paperwork. The European Union's authorities will pressure David Cameron and others to allow absolute free movement within the EU, including within the UK. It will be the doom of your society. Now, I don't have anything against Turks. I dated a Turkish girl prior. I have an appreciation for Turkish culture. I realize that it's Europeanized, that there's nothing wrong with it. But Turks still tend to follow a religious path that has nothing in common with the UK. Now, you may think that's xenophobic to say. I don't agree. I think if hundreds of thousands of Christians began moving to Turkey, I think that would cause problems too. It really doesn't matter what culture you're talking about. When large numbers of people from one culture enter another, it's going to cause friction. The key is assimilation rate, but as we see in the European Union, assimilation is not really happening. Most of the people going there, they're not refugees, they're economic migrants, they're there for welfare. We see for what's happening in Switzerland right now, and I know Switzerland is not a member of the Eurozone, Switzerland or EU, and is in the Eurozone. I can't remember which. The Swiss, some of their schools there are banning like pork sausages, and I think the Swiss people are rightly indignant about this because they feel like they're having to adapt to a foreign culture, a minority that has entered their nation, as opposed to the opposite being true, which is that those who come to Switzerland should learn their culture, should respect it. There's a reason why they went there. They should respect Swiss customs. I think this is the case in most of the EU. Now, there are other nations that are even more Eurosceptic than the UK. Can you imagine if people in France were allowed to hold a referendum without taking to the streets and threatening to bring back the guillotine? The French are more Eurosceptic than the British are. There are several nations. I paid attention to this polling myself. France is the second most Eurosceptic nation. The UK is about tied with Germany in a distant third or fourth. So you can imagine if the French were to leave too, there'd be some problems for Merkel. Now, if the UK leaves, if the UK decides to abandon the failed European project, which is a superstate project, that's what it's leading up to, then the EU will very quickly dissolve. Other nations will hold referendums. The Greeks will leave. It appears that the Italians and Spanish will leave. The French will leave. The Polish and Hungarians might be pressured by nationalists to leave as well, even though the people there generally are Euro-friendly and not Eurosceptic for the most part. There's been a resurgent so-called right-wing nationalist movement, which is really a centrist nationalist movement. They would probably leave the European Union. What will end up happening is that it will be Germany and Germany's vassal states. And really, this is just a German experiment anyway. It's an experiment by a bunch of cultural Marxists in Germany to try to form a new Reich with a new ideology in which all of the other European nations are bound and gagged and subject to their own bureaucratic discretion. It's the idea. It's really a form of pan-German nationalism, by which Merkel and her other traitor buddies can control all of the goings-on in Europe and dissolve the democratic states like the United Kingdom and France without ever having firing a shot. That is, that the last time around that the Germans tried to take over Europe, they were unsuccessful because they tried to fight all of Europe. It didn't work out so well. This time, though, the German bigwigs got together and decided that the best way to take over all of Europe was through drawing them into a confederacy that on its surface would seem very friendly, very peaceful, very multicultural, open, and tolerant. And then once these nations are actually part of a bloc that they can no longer escape from, they will solidify it, clamp down on everybody. The walls will be covered in I'm sure, turrets and so forth. And then everybody will be subject to the wills of what will inevitably turn out to be a largely German elite. Now, they'll pretend to be multicultural at first. After a while, they'll give up the game that they're actually open-minded, tolerant individuals, and they'll probably start putting people in the gulag. And it's a fusion of communism with just totalitarianism itself. And that's what you can look forward to. The UK, right now, the voting that the United Kingdom is undergoing is not just being watched by British citizens. That is, that oftentimes what happens when the democratic process is going on, people from other countries, they don't really care what's going on in the other states. They don't really care who wins. They don't really care what the policies are. It doesn't affect them. They don't give a fuck. But in the UK right now, if the UK does decide to liberate itself, it will have liberated most of Europe in the process. That is, the EU is a failure. It will fail. It will fall apart. It's just a matter of whether the UK leaves and saves themselves a lot of trouble economically and saves a lot of other European states a lot of trouble by showing, yeah, it's okay to leave this experiment because it's not working. The French, the Greeks, the Italians, the Spanish are probably all going to leave very quickly. The Polish and Hungarians would probably leave fairly quickly. Then it would just become Germany and its slave states, its vassals, its communist vassals that it can exploit for cheap labor. And it will pretend, as Merkel has consistently done, that it's a humanitarian effort. Oh, we need to let these Eastern Europeans and refugees in because they don't have a good life where they're at. In reality, it's just a case of Merkel wanted colonial-style slave labor for her own German factories. She's now importing it. She doesn't give a fuck what happens to the average German because she's realized that it's cheaper to subsidize the poorer classes in Germany, to give them a free welfare handout to keep them fucking enslaved, while hiring people that are willing to work for a tenth that of the native Germans. That's what she's realized. It's the final result of really the post-industrial societies. It's rather sad that people think that she's any form of humanitarian. Apparently the Germans now are as Euroskeptic as the UK. It's quite something. But if the UK votes to leave, it won't just be helpful to the UK. It will save the UK a hell of a lot of trouble. It will return you to a sovereign state status. All of these people that say better together, oh, we can't survive outside of the EU. What do you think all these other countries around the world do that are smaller and weaker than the United Kingdom? How do they continue to exist, you may ask? It's because they're sovereign states. They can negotiate their own trade deals. It's not like the UK is just a potato patch. You've got one of the most skilled and educated workforces on the face of the earth. Do you honestly think you're going to get screwed by all these other states? The European Union won't even continue to exist for another 10 years if you leave. And if it did continue to exist, it'd be like a lingering disease, a pall over some of the remaining states that haven't voted to just give up on the fucking failed project and go back to the way things were back when your economies were growing. It'll be like a pall hanging over Germany and all these other states, and that's all it'll be. It'll hold them back. The UK will probably grow very rapidly. Yes, there will be a period shortly after the vote if you vote to leave. Your economy will suffer because the bankers will want to make an example of your country. They will make you suffer. They will fuck with your currency. They will try to fuck with trade. They will try to cock block you from conducting business in the rest of the world. They'll do anything that they can to show, oh, things in the UK are so bad. To all you French people and Greeks and Spaniards and so forth that might want to vote out, this is what will happen to you if you leave the European Union. But it's all a ruse, because the crisis will be manufactured. It's just like the bankers over here manufactured the fiscal crisis we went through before begging for bailouts from Uncle Sam, so they could graft money off of the taxpayers in the form of inflation, grab hundreds of billions of dollars, make off like bandits, and then nothing ended up happening. The government got fucked. The people certainly got fucked. The government still doesn't know what it's doing. They still haven't actually implemented real reform, which is a law stating there will be no bailouts of private sector businesses or banking institutions. That's what we really needed. But they're not going to let you do that. They're going to make you suffer when you leave. Trust me. Oh, they will. Your economy will flatline for a while. You'll go into a recession. When you emerge from that, things will be better than before. It'll be brief. And hopefully people like Nigel Farage will lead the charge in reform in the UK to get rid of all the retarded bureaucracy that you don't need, so you can actually have a free and open economy. Then the UK will be fine. You can control your own borders. You can control your own trade policies. You can actually do business. You won't have all of these problems. And things will be just hunky-dory. But they will try to make you suffer, if only temporarily, to convince other European nations like the Greeks and the Spaniards that get fucked by the EU, the Polish and Hungarians that get fucked by the EU, and the French that are just Eurosceptic anyway, even though they haven't really gotten fucked that hard yet. They'll try to convince them to stay in because they worry. They realize if the second largest economy in the European Union after Germany itself leaves, it will cause referendums to happen in these other states. And they will make the same retarded, veiled threats at those nations that they're making at you. When these economists and bankers and corporate heads and career politicians in the UK say, this will happen and that will happen, the sky will fall, and you'll stop existing, you'll slip to third world status, nobody will be able to get a job, the currency will hyperinflate, you'll hit a Great Depression to end all Great Depressions, bringing all the world markets down with you. Most of that is a lie, and the rest is going to be artificially manufactured if you vote leave. They will gladly try to screw your economy as hard as possible if you leave to make an example of the United Kingdom. I can guarantee it will happen. Their predictions, at least halfway, will come true, but they'll be the ones doing it to you. Is this the kind of person, somebody who would stab your nation in the back for leaving a failed experiment that they helped to fail in the first place? Is that the sort of person that you want to take political advice from, that you want to take social advice from, that you want to take economic advice from? I would hope not. Seems like the last person you'd want to ask for advice, because they're trying to kill off your economy. They're trying to stab you in the back. If somebody were to try to do that to the United States, there'd be hell to pay. People would reject it roundly. The fact is, the idea that you have to remain in the European Union in order to be an open culture and have some degree of free movement and have a good economy and be able to defend it doesn't make any sense. What, you think before the EU formed, the UK was a Cabbage Patch, irrelevant third world nation where people walked around in rags? Of course not. It was one of the wealthiest places in the world. It had nothing to do with the EU. You were doing just fine. You should stick to these Commonwealth states and trade with them. Trade with the US, trade with the Canadians and the Australians and so forth. Your economy will begin growing faster than that of any of the EU states. It'll be difficult for Merkel and the others to keep up because the point of the EU is not to enrich these vassal member states. It's to enrich Merkel. It's to enrich Germany, to allow them to build the largest industrial manufacturing muscle on earth to compete with the Chinese. That's what Merkel wants. You think that the Euro-friendly politicians in states like Germany, do you think for a moment, please tell me, that the spirit of like the anarcho-punk European isn't dead, and you actually realize the average politician doesn't give a damn about you? The average politician here doesn't either. The average politician anywhere in the world doesn't give a damn about their people. It doesn't matter how far right they are. It doesn't matter how far left they are. When the politician tells you you should vote Remain because otherwise things will be terrible, what they really mean is that if you vote out, they'll be out of a job and they'll no longer be able to embezzle your money. So yes, I absolutely encourage every subscriber that I have from the UK, vote Leave. It's the right thing to do for your society, and it will help to liberate not just your nation. It's not just about the UK. You'll be liberating half of Europe in the process very quickly. France will vote out. They'll leave. The Spanish, the Italians, the Greeks. And then, once the EU dissolves in part and parcel, or fully, once the EU is crippled and sick or else dies out altogether, you're just fine. It's second largest economy in Europe again. And there's no EU to have to hassle you around. Well, I guess things are just fine. Now you can trade with the other European states because they left the EU. Ingratiate yourselves to these states. Trade with the Greeks. Trade with the Spanish and Italians. Trade with the Polish. Trade with the French. Do what you've always done. What really startles me, in closing, I'll say one last thing that's really funny to me. When people say, oh, there'd be no peace in Europe without the EU, we'd all be fighting each other. Are you fucking nuts? Are you a lunatic? You think that the European people are going to suddenly take up arms over century-old border disputes because the European Union dissolves? Come on, get over this nonsense. That's complete hogwash in every possible sense of the word. It's just never going to happen. It would never happen. The UK has nuclear weapons. You think someone's going to invade the UK because, oh, well, one of my ancestors owned this plot of land 3,000 years ago. We're going to declare war on the UK now. Are you nuts? Is that really how you think? Are you that brainwashed that you believe it when Cameron tells you that? It's not going to happen. The people of Europe will continue to enjoy peace unless you stay in the EU. And the situation there, because of bureaucracy and because of the nonstop stream of economic migrants, gets so bad that the Europeans really do get bitter towards each other. You have Merkel, you have the Western Europeans screwing the Eastern Europeans, and you have nationalists there reacting to the open border policy. That's a situation for war, not the dissolution of the EU, which will force competition back into the European economies and cause them to grow. That's a great thing. That will keep people from fighting each other. The European Union will probably lead to the Third World War if it stays in full effect for much longer. You need to cut the head off the dragon, vote Leave. Yes, I know, the polls probably are rigged. The voting probably is rigged. That's why you need to get out and vote. If there's as much fervor as is suggested within the Leave campaign as opposed to the Remain campaign, you'll win. But you have to actually do your duty and vote. So I think there's only a few hours until the UK begins voting. I don't know. I'm not good at time zones. So get out and do it. Take that 15, 20 minutes out of your life and do your duty for the United Kingdom. Because it benefits the US too, by the way. We can trade more freely with the UK if you leave, which will also help to enrich your economy. It'll make it stronger. We're a way bigger economy than the Germans are. We're a way bigger economy than all of continental Europe combined. Why the fuck would you want to stay with those people? The French too. Why would you want to limit yourself to like the Germans of all people? Why would the Polish want to do this? I can't even think of a reason why the Polish nation would want to partner with the Germans. I can't think of a reason. There is no reason. It doesn't make sense. Why would you want to partner with a country that is so blatantly instituting bureaucratic programs to enrich itself at your own expense, to keep you down in the dirt, to keep you growing the cabbages that they eat? Why would you want to do that? I just don't understand it. All of you people should vote Leave. All the Europeans should vote Leave. Every nation, leave Germany on its own. Merkel's an evildoer. Even her own people appear now to realize that for the first time. Merkel's a retard. The bureaucrats in Brussels don't know what they're doing. You will inevitably have a situation where some countries are pissed off, Some countries benefit at others' expense when you have such a confederacy built up out of nations with economies and cultures that are so radically different, with different languages, with different customs, with different desires. It will inevitably happen. It is a failed experiment. It's not the same as the United States. You can wish all day that it was, but it's not, and it never will be. It will fail. It will fall in on itself. It's just a matter of how quickly and how much pain happens before it does. The UK should vote leave. That's about all. Peace.